Frank Gaffney's with me, Executive Chairman of the Center for Security Policy and Vice Chair of the Committee on the Present Danger China, presentdangerchina.org. Center for Security Policy is securefreedom.org, and counterjihad.com also has his Secure Freedom Radio. Frank, great to have you back, and it was a pleasure to enjoy some salmon with you yesterday, which is I left my house for lunch, which is incredibly rare. I rarely have lunch, but Frank compelled me to leave my bunker. Thank you. Frank, I want to play some audio of the president and get your reaction to what I thought was a pretty stellar speech. And particularly, I have a couple of China clips I've not played, a couple other pretty big clips that I think, and I'll get your 30,000 foot on it. But the latest impeachment fiasco, which is taking place, is based off of a national security foreign policy issue, which is that the president, according to the Democrats, has reached out to the Ukrainians and it requested they interfere in our election. I don't think anyone who lives outside of the Excella DC bubble, Excella DC New York bubble, actually believes that's literally what happened. But give me your perspective on this latest hysteria and if this really is the one that will lead to impeachment.
I guess we'll have a better feeling for that in the course of the day today, Alex. The president has made it clear he's going to release the transcript of his conversation with the Ukrainian president, which precipitated the whistleblower claim, we're told, that there was something untoward done that constituted impeachable offenses. He's actually, I gather, going to also release the whistleblower claim, or the report thereof, I guess, by the Intelligence Community's Inspector General. All of which is to say that we're in a situation where, prior to any of that information being available to Nancy Pelosi or anybody else in the House of Representatives, this, witch hunt, as the president has called it, has been set in motion. And it does, I think, for perhaps a few of us inside the Beltway, and certainly most of the American people, I would think, call to mind that famous quote from the lunatic queen in Alice in Wonderland: verdict first, trial after. We ought to see this information.
That's right.
Make sense of it for ourselves, and then decide whether the president has really done something that remotely approaches an impeachable offense.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that why do you think they're doing this before we've seen the transcript? Like, they're already out there on a limb today, and it just seems like there's got to be some logic to it that I'm missing. That why couldn't Pelosi have held out? She's held out for 3 years. And I introduced the show, Frank. There's sort of two schools of thought, which is that this really is unprecedented or has very little precedent, which is that there is a formal impeachment inquiry taking place, which is very, very rare. But then again, the last 3 years have been a de facto impeachment inquiry anyway. So you can make the case this is literally nothing has changed. You can make that argument. So why couldn't she have held out one more day or 2 more days before moving forward on this?
Well, I think to give her the maximum benefit of the doubt, she was making the decision before it became clear that the president was going to be releasing these documents. So the 1 more day, 2 more days thing might not have seemed, as interesting or opportune as they are at the moment. But look, let's face it, she's a politician. She has made calculations, I think, to this point, that the idea of impeaching this president is on net bad for the Democratic Party, bad for its candidates for the presidency, and likely, to set them back. What I think happened yesterday, and this is just my guess, I don't have, access to her innermost thoughts, needless to say, but my guess is that she saw a very fundamental shift in her caucus when these 7 freshmen who have national security credentials by virtue of having served in the military, served in the intelligence community, wrote this op-ed in the Washington Post yesterday, essentially announcing that they now were prepared to pursue impeachment of the president because what he had done in this case allegedly, called into question the sorts of things that they swore a constitutional oath to defend. And that's, I think, the calculation that prompted her to finally say, oh, I better go with this. We're now getting to the point where there's likely to be a majority in the House of Representatives in favor of impeachment. Now, interestingly, you mentioned, has anything really changed? She hasn't taken that question to the House. She hasn't asked for the full House to vote on this impeachment. She's just announced that there's now going to be an impeachment investigation. As I understand it, she can't actually do that beyond what has been going on,
Interesting.
in the direction of these various committees themselves.
Very interesting. Okay, Frank. So what do you think comes of this? Do you have a prediction? Because again, we know that, and even Ian Bremmer, not exactly a right winger on CNN, talking about how Joe Biden does have a problem because his son did take money from the Ukraine from Ukraine in order to buy influence, and he took it. He took the check, welcomed it openly, and it's just going to lead. You start pulling the thread back, and you're gonna get to China, of course, and how he was literally riding Air Force Two to cut even dirtier deals with the Chinese, who of course are trying to buy people off. That's literally what the Chinese do. That is their only move. That's their one move. That is their they've only got one move. That's it.
Well, as you mentioned, we're involved with the Committee on the Present Danger of China. They've got a few other moves, unfortunately, but corruption is one of the hardy perennials of Chinese tradecraft, going back, of course, to the emperors. Let me say this, Alex. My feeling about this is that, again, we'll have a better fix on what the likelihood is that this particular impeachment fandango will go the distance any more than the previous ones have when we see what information is released today. It's hard to calculate without knowing whether there's any factual basis for this, or, as we're being told, whether the individual who brought these claims never actually saw the transcript, let alone heard the call, and that he has exhibited to the satisfaction of the Inspector General of the Intelligence community that he was a partisan, that he actually wanted somebody else to be president, that he wanted some other Democratic candidate to prevail. I mean, those are material facts that I have the feeling by the end of the day we're going to, as I say, understand better. And once we do, this may go the way of the previous antics that have caused such turmoil to our polity over the past 3 years. And I think it's a real testament to what President Trump was talking about. Maybe we could segue to the speech, because it was a splendid speech yesterday.
Okay, so give me your overall perspective. Sure.
Of the
yeah. Sure. Yeah, give me your overall perspective, then I'll play some clips.
My overall perspective is that it was one of the most compelling speeches, certainly before the UN General Assembly, of any president in my lifetime, going back at least to Reagan's days. He spoke the truth to those heads of state, specifically the truth about the importance of sovereignty, the importance of nation states, the importance of the sorts of freedoms and the kinds of, vesting in the people the power that is one of the great contributions our founders made, not just to our own country, but to the world. It was elegant. It was eloquent. It was desperately needed. And he contrasted it repeatedly with what the left has brought us, the socialists, the communists, other totalitarians, with their death and destruction, with their oppression, with their increasing capabilities to use advanced technologies to intensify their control of the people, not just in their own countries, but elsewhere, notably communist China. This was very much the kind of I think, wake-up call the world needed. And everybody in the room seemed to have been sitting on their hands throughout. But I was cheering, as I suspect an awful lot of Americans were as well.
All right. Frank Gaffney again is with me, Center for Security Policy, securefreedom.org, counterjihad.com, presentdangerchina.org. Let's play a couple of clips, and then we'll get Frank's specific reactions. Let's pick a couple of these China ones for starters. Let's go with 1C, Paul.
The United States lost 60,000 factories after China entered the WTO. This is happening to other countries all over the globe. The World Trade Organization needs drastic change. The second largest economy in the world should not be permitted to declare itself a developing country in order to game the system at others' expense.
Okay, can we pause it there, Frank? So let's talk about that point, which is China's second biggest economy in the world. My reference to their one move, which is that their favorite move, at least, is to get people dependent on them economically. That's on a micro and macro level. That's the whole one belt, one road mentality. And they're treated. They get this protected status because they're designated as a developing nation. I understand the logic because they have 61% of the world's population. I'm exaggerating for emphasis, but it's gone too far, right?
Well, I think it was gone too far when it started. And remember, it was Bill Clinton who let them into the World Trade Organization. It was Bill Clinton who was Exhibit A of corruption at the hands of the Chinese. And the idea that they would come in, they were more of a developing nation then, to be sure, than they are today. But I think Donald Trump is exactly right in calling them out, not only for, essentially gaming and scamming the system in this way, Alex, but also in the various other techniques that they have employed, whether it's theft of intellectual property, whether it's currency manipulation, whether it's predatory trade practices, whether it's the Belt and Road Initiative, the debt trap scheme, as it's called. I think of it as kind of the payday loan scheme. I mean, these are predators, and Donald Trump said so to the United Nations at a time when, let's face it, more and more and more countries around the planet are actually getting hooked up to this corrupt totalitarian enterprise. They're exporting importing from China, exporting from China, the security state apparatus that will help them control their own people. They're taking the money and they're tying their countries both through debt and also through things like this digital infrastructure that the Chinese are building out with Huawei and, their surveillance apparatus to ensure that these people don't go anywhere in the future. It's colonialism on a scale we haven't seen, I think, in the history of the world. Donald Trump was exactly right to be putting down markers about this and contrasting it with what America offers, what the free world has been about. And this is a moment when we need those truths told more than ever.
Okay, let's continue with the clip, Paul. Go ahead.
Were tolerated, ignored, or even encouraged. Globalism exerted a religious pull over past leaders, causing them to ignore their own national interests. But as far as America is concerned, those days are over.
All right, any thoughts, Frank?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite passages in this, as well as the one very early on where he talks about basically, again, sovereignty, the will of the people being in control, not the elites. The fact that this is a moment when we have to defend the nation state, and arguing to leaders of all of these nation states that should be their first responsibility. Their nations, their people, their economies, the livelihoods of their population will be improved if they stick with that, and will be despoiled, if not cratered, if they go down the road of globalism on the one hand or one of the other forms of totalitarianism on the other.
Yeah, that's correct. And I think I might have played that one earlier in the show, Frank, because I had it at the top of my list. Let me play one more. 1G, Mr. Paul. This is about Iran.
In response to Iran's recent attack on Saudi Arabian oil facilities, we just imposed the highest level of sanctions on Iran's central bank and sovereign wealth fund. All nations have a duty to act. No responsible government should subsidize Iran's bloodlust. As long as Iran's menacing behavior continues, sanctions will not be lifted. They will be tightened. Iran's leaders will have turned a proud nation into just another cautionary tale of what happens when a ruling class abandons its people and embarks on a crusade for personal power and riches.
So it seems like there's three things happening, kind of going in reverse order, Frank. It seems like the last comment is a general comment about the ruling class losing touch with his citizenry is something I think the president doesn't like on a grander level, not just Iran. And then I think the middle part of that clip, he's trying to, I think, empower the Iranian people to stand up to their own regime, their own leadership. But at the top, he's saying that no nation should be subsidizing Iran's bloodlust. Who is he calling out there?
Let me make an overall point, if I could, quickly, Alex.
Sure.
You know, CNN, in reporting on this speech, Jim Acosta noted that it was low energy. I thought the tone was absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
And I would characterize it as more in sorrow than in anger. I think he wanted to convey he took no pleasure in pointing out these problems, whether it's China, whether it's Venezuela, whether it's, Iran. But he felt he must. And he spoke to these issues, and I think you captured perfectly the key elements of the message to Iran, most especially to the Iranian people, about our solidarity with them. But he was basically speaking in that last bit about the subsidizing the bloodlust, of course, to both nations of the free world, specifically the UK, France, and Germany, who, ironically, just in the past couple of days, endorsed his finding that Iran was responsible for attacking Saudi Arabia. And yet they seem determined to continue to try to prop up this regime, which is, horrifically, misguided, but completely, contrary to logic, for heaven's sakes. But secondly, I think that what the president is really doing there is calling out the Russians and Chinese as well, because they are the great enablers, specifically the Chinese. They continue buying immense quantities of Iranian oil at a time when virtually the rest of the world has stopped doing so. They are continuing to register through various political and international mechanisms, their strong solidarity with the mullahs of Iran. This is exactly what the president is getting at, and he's right to call them out, and we need to bring additional pressure to bear on both friends and foes to get them to stop doing this.
Okay, so Frank, what else beyond the tough talk, which I love, and only Trump has the guts to do this, especially in their face? And Jim Acosta is so low rent, and it's I have a buddy in the publishing world who is making fun of him because his book sales were just so pathetic. No one cares Jim Acosta's hot take. No one really even cares about his reporting either, but certainly no one cares about his hot takes. But what is, practically speaking, with the president with this tough talk? What's next to pressure some of these countries? Again, that we keep getting lectured to about how the UK and France and Germany, they're all our allies. But they're propping up the most evil regime on earth.
Yeah. Alex, I think the first order of business is to do what he did yesterday. You cannot,
agreed,
I think, overestimate the importance of just calling people out You know,
Sure.
When Reagan called the Soviet Union the evil empire, I think the ripple effect of doing that in delegitimating what was going on in Moscow and emboldening the people of the Soviet Union, and by the way, all of those captive nations that it had enslaved, it was incalculable. And so it's a start. I think what he said about Iran is he is intensifying the sanctions on Iran, and there are ways in which I think we can greatly further create costs to people like the Chinese for doing business with the Iranians. And with respect to our own allies, I think that they can be, especially at a moment when they are most immediately, let's be clear about this, along with Israel, they are most immediately in the crosshairs of what the Iranian regime is doing with its ballistic missile programs and the nuclear weapons that, make no mistake about it, are intended to go on that increasingly large array of ballistic missiles. So they should know at a moment when they're pointing out themselves that the Iranian regime is attacking another sovereign nation, that they're at risk too. They have every interest, and I think the more we're talking to their people over the heads of the elites who, as the president said so powerfully, don't really give a fig about their people. Even, in some cases, democracies, for heaven's sakes. We need to, I think, make that point hard and intensify the pressure on them as well.
Frank, great analysis. Really appreciate it. Center for Security Policy, presentdangerchina.org. Good stuff, Frank. Thank you so much.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Alex. All the best.
Talk to you next week.